I discovered my 7-year-old daughter, Sophie, crying in her bedroom, clutching an empty glass jar that once held $230 in carefully saved birthday money, allowance, and tooth fairy coins. Through tears, Sophie explained that Aunt Jessica took every penny while I was at the grocery store, claiming the money would buy better Christmas presents for Jessica's twin boys. My hands shook as I realized my sister didn't just steal money, she broke my daughter's heart and destroyed months of patient saving for Sophie's dream bicycle. The drive to my parents' house felt endless as Sophie sat quietly in her booster seat, still clutching that empty jar like it might magically refill itself. My husband David squeezed my hand at every red light, knowing I was fighting to stay calm. We had planned this Sunday dinner weeks ago, back when family gatherings felt safe and predictable. The moment we walked through the front door, I could hear Jessica's laughter echoing from the living room. Her twins, Marcus and Tyler, were sprawled on the carpet with brand new gaming tablets, their faces glowing with excitement as they showed off to my parents. "Look what Mom bought us," Marcus announced proudly. "These cost $300 each." My mother clasped her hands together in delight. "Jessica, you spoil those boys so wonderfully." I took a deep breath and walked into the room, Sophie trailing behind me with her empty jar. "Jessica, we need to talk about Sophie's savings money." The room went quiet except for the electronic sounds from the twins' new tablets. Jessica looked up from the couch, her expression shifting from surprise to defiance in seconds. "Oh, that," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "I was planning to mention it. Sophie had way more money than she needed sitting around, so I put it to better use." "Better use?" I kept my voice steady, aware that Sophie was listening to every word. "The boys needed new tablets for school," Jessica explained, as if this justified everything. "Sophie's just going to waste that money on some silly bicycle she'll outgrow in a year. Marcus and Tyler will actually use these for education." My father set down his coffee cup with a heavy sigh. "Eva, surely you're not going to make a scene over this. Family helps family." "She stole from my daughter," I said quietly, feeling David's supportive hand on my shoulder. "Stole?" Jessica's voice rose an octave. "How dare you use that word? I borrowed some money to help my children. You act like Sophie was going to cure cancer with those dollar bills." My mother stood up, her face flushed with disappointment directed entirely at me. "Eva Marie, I raised you better than this. Your sister is struggling to provide for those boys, and here you are being selfish and materialistic." "Struggling?" I glanced around at Jessica's designer purse. Her new boots that probably cost more than Sophie's entire wardrobe. She bought $600 worth of tablets. "Those were necessary educational tools," Jessica snapped. "Unlike some frivolous bicycle that serves no purpose except feeding a 7-year-old's wants instead of needs." Sophie stepped closer to me, and I felt her small hand slip into mine. She hadn't said a word since we arrived, but I could see the confusion and hurt in her eyes as she watched the adults in her life dismiss her feelings completely. David finally spoke up. "Sophie saved that money for 8 months. She did extra chores, gave up buying toys, even contributed her tooth fairy money. And now she's learned about generosity," my father declared. "There's nothing wrong with sharing wealth within the family. Sharing involves asking permission," David replied firmly. Jessica stood up abruptly, her face reddening. "I don't need permission to help my own nephews. Eva has everything handed to her: a stable husband, a good job, a nice house. My boys deserve some advantages too." The twins looked up from their tablets, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. Tyler, the younger one, smiled innocently at Sophie. "Aunt Eva, want to see our new games?" Sophie shook her head and pressed closer to my side. I realized she was protecting herself, learning that even family members couldn't be trusted to respect what belonged to her. "This isn't about advantages," I said carefully. "This is about teaching children that their efforts and savings matter." "Oh, please," Jessica rolled her eyes. "She's 7 years old. She doesn't understand the value of money anyway." "She understood it well enough to save every penny for something she really wanted," David said. My mother's lips pursed in frustration. "David, you're encouraging Eva to be vindictive toward her own sister." "I'm supporting my wife and daughter when they've been wronged," he replied calmly. The room fell silent again except for the electronic beeping from the tablets. I looked at my parents, hoping to see some recognition of how this situation was affecting Sophie, but they seemed determined to view Jessica as the victim. Then my father delivered the final blow. "Since we're talking about family support, your mother and I have decided to give Jessica an early inheritance of $15,000 to help with the boys' education fund." My stomach dropped. "An early inheritance? The boys have greater financial needs right now," my mother explained. "You and David are more financially stable, so you can wait until we're actually gone." Jessica's triumphant smile made my blood boil, but I kept my voice level. "I see. Don't be jealous, Eva," Jessica said sweetly. "Maybe if you had boys instead of just one girl, you'd understand the extra expenses involved." Sophie's grip on my hand tightened, and I realized she was absorbing every cruel word, learning that her value in this family was somehow less than her male cousins. "We should go," I said quietly. "Don't leave angry," my mother pleaded. "Jessica didn't mean any harm." "Actually," Jessica called out as we reached the door, "I think Sophie should thank me. I taught her an important lesson about what really matters in this world." As we drove home in silence, Sophie finally spoke from her booster seat. "Mommy, why did Grandma and Grandpa think I was wrong for wanting my money back?" I met her eyes in the rearview mirror, my heart breaking for her lost innocence. "Sometimes adults make mistakes too, sweetheart." But inside, I was already planning my next move. 3 days passed before Jessica showed up at my front door unannounced, her twins in tow. I was folding laundry in the living room when the doorbell rang, and through the peephole, I saw her standing there with what she probably thought was a reconciliation smile. "We need to clear the air," she announced the moment I opened the door. Marcus and Tyler rushed past her into my house, immediately gravitating toward Sophie's toy corner. Sophie emerged from the kitchen where she'd been helping me organize coupons, her face lighting up briefly at seeing her cousins before remembering recent events. "Boys, go play with Sophie while Aunt Eva and I have a grown-up talk," Jessica instructed. I watched as Jessica's gaze swept across my living room, taking inventory of our furniture, our electronics, our comfortable but modest lifestyle that she'd always resented. "Look, I didn't come here to fight," Jessica began, settling herself on my couch without invitation. "But I think you're teaching Sophie some very unhealthy lessons about money and family loyalty." "Unhealthy lessons?" "This obsession with that bicycle," Jessica waved her hand dismissively. "You're raising her to be materialistic and selfish. Do you really want your daughter growing up thinking possessions matter more than helping family?" From the corner of my eye, I saw Sophie's shoulders tense as she pretended to focus on building blocks with the twins. "She saved that money herself," I said quietly. "Exactly my point," Jessica leaned forward conspiratorially. "A 7-year-old hoarding money instead of learning about generosity and sacrifice. When I was her age, I shared everything with you." The rewriting of history was breathtaking. Jessica had never shared anything willingly as a child. "I need to tell you something else," Jessica continued, lowering her voice. "I didn't just take the money from Sunday. I've been borrowing small amounts for months." My blood ran cold. "What?" "Just $5 or $10 here and there when I visited. Sophie had so much, and the boys needed lunch money or supplies for school projects." Jessica spoke as if this revelation should make me proud of her resourcefulness. "You've been stealing from my daughter for months?" "I've been teaching her about family responsibility," Jessica corrected sharply. "Something you clearly failed to do." Sophie's building blocks scattered across the floor as her hands trembled. The twins looked up, confused by the sudden noise. "There's something else," Jessica continued with sick satisfaction. "Remember that special silver dollar your grandfather gave Sophie before he died? She had it sitting right there in the jar, serving no purpose. I used it at the parking meter last month." The air left my lungs. That silver dollar was Sophie's most treasured possession, a tangible connection to the great-grandfather who died when she was 5, but who had always made her feel special during his visits. Sophie's soft gasp told me she'd heard every word. "You spent my great-grandpa's coin?" Sophie's voice was barely a whisper. Jessica turned to face her with a patronizing smile. "Sweetie, you're great. Grandpa would want his coin to serve a practical purpose, not sit collecting dust. Besides, you have plenty of memories of him." "But it was mine," Sophie said, tears forming in her eyes. That's exactly the selfish thinking we need to correct, Jessica said firmly. You're 7 years old, you don't need to hoard money and sentimental objects. My boys have greater potential, and more expenses ahead of them. Greater potential? I repeated, incredulous. Let's be honest, Eva. Boys have different opportunities in this world. They need more resources, more support, more preparation for leadership roles. Sophie will probably just get married and have someone else support her anyway. Marcus and Tyler continued playing, oblivious to their mother's toxic words, but Sophie heard every syllable. I watched my daughter's face as she absorbed the message that her dreams, her savings, her treasured possessions, and her very potential were all considered less valuable than her male cousins. I think you should leave, I said quietly. Not until you agree to stop poisoning Sophie against me, Jessica demanded. She used to love spending time with her cousins, and now she acts weird around us. You're teaching her to hold grudges. I'm teaching her to value herself and her belongings. Jessica stood up abruptly, her voice rising. Well, you'd better check that attitude, Eva. Mom and Dad are already upset with how you handled Sunday dinner. If you keep making me the villain in this family, I can turn them completely against you. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Jessica had always been skilled at manipulating our parents' emotions, playing the victim while positioning herself as the family member who needed the most support and protection. And just so we're clear, Jessica added with a cold smile, I know about that college savings account you've been building for Sophie. Mom mentioned it last Christmas. Maybe I'll need some help with the boys' education expenses next year. And since you're always talking about family helping family, Sophie's face went pale as she realized Jessica was threatening to take even more of her future. Boys, time to go, Jessica called out sweetly, her tone changing completely as she addressed her sons. Say goodbye to Cousin Sophie. Marcus and Tyler hugged Sophie dutifully, still unaware of the devastation their mother had just caused. As they headed toward the door, Tyler turned back with innocent concern. Cousin Sophie, why are you crying? She's just tired, Jessica answered before Sophie could speak. Sometimes little girls get emotional when they don't get their way. After they left, Sophie collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. But these weren't the tears of a child denied a toy. These were the tears of a little girl learning that the adults she trusted could systematically devalue her worth, dismiss her efforts, and threaten her security. I held her close, feeling her small body shake with the weight of lessons. No, 7-year-old should have to learn. But as I comforted my daughter, my mind was already working, formulating a plan that would protect Sophie and expose Jessica's cruelty once and for all. The war Jessica had declared was about to become very real, but she had no idea what she'd just unleashed. That night, after Sophie finally fell asleep clutching her favorite stuffed animal, I sat at my computer and began what would become the most important investigation of my life. If Jessica wanted to play games with my daughter's emotional and financial security, she was about to learn that I wasn't the passive sister she remembered from childhood. My first stop was Jessica's social media accounts. What I found there made my stomach turn with a mixture of anger and disgust. Photo after photo showed Jessica and her family living what appeared to be a luxury lifestyle that directly contradicted her claims of financial hardship. There was Jessica, at a spa resort in Scottsdale just 3 weeks ago, captioned, "Much-needed girls' weekend, while Brad watches the boys." The resort's website showed room rates starting at $400 per night. Another photo from 2 months ago showed Jessica wearing a designer handbag I recognized from a magazine ad, price tag $1,500, captioned, "Treating myself because I deserve nice things too." The twins appeared in dozens of photos wearing expensive brand, name clothing, eating at upscale restaurants, and enjoying activities that cost serious money. A recent post showed them at an indoor trampoline park that charged $35 per child, with Jessica's comment, "The boys had such a blast, we might make this a weekly tradition." But the post that made my blood boil was from last month. A photo of Jessica's elaborate birthday party for the twins, complete with a professional entertainer, custom decorations, and a cake that must have cost at least $200. The caption read, "Nothing is too good for my precious boys. They deserve the world." I screenshot everything, creating a digital folder that told a story very different from the struggling single mother Jessica portrayed to our family. Next, I called my friend Sarah, who worked at the same company as Jessica's husband Brad. Over coffee the next morning, Sarah revealed information that shattered Jessica's narrative completely. "Brad got promoted 6 months ago," Sarah told me quietly. "He's making almost $20,000 more than he was last year." Jessica came to the company Christmas party wearing a dress that cost more than my monthly car payment. She told my parents Brad was struggling with work stress, and they needed financial help. Sarah shook her head. "Brad's doing great. If anything, Jessica's spending habits are causing him stress." He mentioned to my husband that Jessica bought a $5,000 outdoor play set for the boys' backyard, then charged it to their credit card without telling him. Armed with this information, I decided to dig deeper. A quick search of public records revealed that Jessica and Brad had refinanced their house twice in the past 3 years, each time pulling out equity for what the documents listed as home improvements and education expenses. But the most disturbing discovery came when I contacted my great-aunt Martha, my grandfather's sister, who lived 2 states away. Aunt Martha was 86 years old, and had always been sharp as a tack, but she rarely spoke to the rest of our family except at major holidays. "Oh dear," Aunt Martha's voice grew sad when I mentioned Jessica. "I was hoping someone would eventually ask about that situation." "What situation?" "Last spring, Jessica called me crying about Brad losing his job, and the boys needing money for school supplies. She said your parents were tapped out and couldn't help. I felt so sorry for her, and those children. My heart sank as I realized what was coming. I sent her $5,000 from my retirement savings," Aunt Martha continued. "She promised to pay me back within 6 months, but every time I've asked, she says things are still tight and she needs more time." "Aunt Martha, Brad never lost his job, he got promoted." The silence on the phone stretched for nearly a minute before Aunt Martha spoke again, her voice heavy with disappointment. "I should have known. That girl was always good at telling people what they wanted to hear. I'm going to fix this," I promised her. "Oh honey, don't worry about the money. At my age, I don't need much. But it hurts to know she lied to an old woman who was just trying to help family." After hanging up with Aunt Martha, I made one more crucial phone call. My neighbor's daughter worked as a bank teller, and while she couldn't give me specific account information, she could confirm something I suspected. "I can't tell you balances or anything like that," Lisa explained, "but I can say that Brad opened a separate checking account about 4 months ago. He comes in alone to make deposits and withdrawals. Usually, when spouses open separate accounts, it's because there are trust issues with money management." The picture was becoming crystal clear. Jessica had been lying to everyone, our parents, Aunt Martha, probably even Brad, about some of her purchases. She was funding her expensive lifestyle by manipulating family members and hiding purchases from her husband. But the final piece of evidence came from the most unexpected source. I was scrolling through Jessica's Facebook friends list when I noticed several comments from women in what appeared to be a private shopping group. Curious, I did some detective work and discovered Jessica was part of an online community called Designer Deals and Steals, where members bragged about their expensive purchases and shared tips for hiding spending from family members. In one screenshot, I managed to capture before the group went private, Jessica had posted, "Anyone else have family members who think your kids don't deserve nice things?" My sister actually got mad because I borrowed some money from my 7-year-old niece to buy my boys what they needed. Some people have no sense of family priorities. The responses were even more enlightening. Jessica had clearly been painting herself as the victim of a greedy sister who hoarded money while her poor boys went without. But one comment thread revealed Jessica's true nature. "I've learned that older family members always have emergency funds they're not using. A little financial crisis story goes a long way toward accessing those resources. My great-aunt sent me $5,000 last month. I printed everything, organized it chronologically, and created a file that would tell the complete story of Jessica's financial manipulation and lies. But I wasn't ready to use it yet, because what I'd discovered was worse than simple theft. Jessica had been systematically manipulating vulnerable family members, teaching her own children entitlement at my daughter's expense, and creating a pattern of emotional abuse disguised as family dynamics. The war Jessica had declared on Sophie's security and self-worth was about to end, but not in the way Jessica expected. I was done being the understanding sister who kept peace at any cost. It was time to protect my daughter and expose the truth. The next morning, I put Sophie on the school bus with extra kisses and reassurance, then began executing the plan I'd been crafting all night. Jessica's world was built on lies and manipulation, but it only worked because her victims didn't communicate with each other. That was about to change. My first move was to contact Brad directly. I'd always liked my brother-in-law, but Jessica had gradually isolated him from family gatherings, claiming he was too stressed to enjoy social events. Now I understood why. I met Brad at a coffee shop near his office during his lunch break. He looked surprised to hear from me, but agreed to meet when I mentioned concerns about family finances. "Brad, I need to show you something, and I want you to know I'm coming from a place of caring about you and the boys." I placed printouts of Jessica's social media posts in front of him chronologically, along with receipts I'd calculated from the expensive items and activities she'd documented. His face grew pale as he studied the evidence. "This spa weekend," he pointed at one photo. "She told me her friend paid for it because she won a radio contest. And this handbag? She said it was a knockoff she bought at a flea market for $20. Brad's hands shook slightly as he flipped through more photos. "This restaurant, she told me she was eating at home with the boys that night because I was working late." I pulled out my phone and showed him the designer deals group screenshots. "I found these on a shopping forum Jessica belongs to." Brad read Jessica's posts about manipulating family members and hiding purchases, his expression shifting from confusion to anger to deep sadness. "The separate bank account," I said gently. "You opened it because you suspected she was hiding spending, didn't you?" He nodded slowly. "I kept finding charges I didn't recognize, but she always had explanations. She made me feel like I was being paranoid and controlling." Brad looked up at me with exhausted eyes. "How much do you think she's hidden from me?" "Based on what's documented here, probably $15,000 to $20,000 in the past year alone." Brad put his head in his hands. "I've been working overtime to cover what I thought were unexpected expenses. She kept saying the boys needed this or that for school, or that household costs were higher than we budgeted." "Brad, there's more. She's been taking money from Sophie's savings jar for months. And yesterday, she admitted to using Sophie's special silver dollar from my grandfather for parking meter change." The anger that flashed across Brad's face was immediate and intense. "She took money from Sophie? From a 7-year-old? $230 total, plus the silver dollar. She used it to buy the boys those tablets, then told Sophie that your boys deserved it more because they have greater potential." "She said that to a 7-year-old? Brad's voice was barely controlled. I showed him photos of Sophie with her empty savings jar, explaining how she'd saved every penny for 8 months working toward her bicycle goal. "This stops now," Brad said firmly. "I'm calling my lawyer this afternoon." "Brad, there's something else you need to know about your family's finances." I told him about Aunt Martha's $5,000, about Jessica's lies regarding his job status, and about the pattern of manipulation she'd used with our parents. "She's been telling people you lost your job? She told Aunt Martha you were unemployed, and the boys needed help with school expenses. That's how she got $5,000 from an 86-year-old woman living on retirement savings." Brad stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "Eva, I want you to know that I had no idea about any of this. I work hard to provide for my family, and I thought Jessica was being frugal with household management. I know you didn't know. That's why I wanted to talk to you first. What can I do to make this right? Help me protect Sophie, and make sure Jessica faces appropriate consequences for her actions." Brad pulled out his phone. "I'm texting Jessica right now to tell her I'm picking up the boys from school today, and they're staying with my parents tonight. I need time to figure out how to handle this without traumatizing Marcus and Tyler." My next stop was my parents' house. I'd called ahead and asked them to check their credit reports, claiming I'd heard about identity theft in their neighborhood. When I arrived, they were sitting at the kitchen table with confusion and anger written across their faces. "Eva, we found something very disturbing," my father said without preamble. "What did you find?" My mother held up a credit card statement. "There's a credit card in my name that I never opened. Someone charged almost $8,000 on it over the past 6 months. I sat down across from them, pulling out my organized file. I think I know who opened that account. I explained everything I'd discovered, showing them the evidence of Jessica's lies, her hidden spending, her manipulation of Aunt Martha, and her systematic theft from Sophie. "This can't be right," my mother kept saying. "Jessica wouldn't do this." "Mom, look at the dates on these social media posts, compared to when she claimed to need money for the boys' expenses." My father studied the timeline I'd created, his business background, making it easy for him to spot the discrepancies. She bought a $1,500 purse the same week she told us Brad lost his job. "And this spa weekend was the day after she took Sophie's savings money," I added. My mother's face crumpled as she realized the extent of Jessica's deception. She stole from Sophie? From her own niece? She told Sophie that the boys deserved the money more because they have greater potential. She said that to a 7-year-old child? My father's voice was thunderous. I pulled out my final piece of evidence, a recording I'd made the previous evening when Jessica called to warn me again about poisoning Sophie against her. My parents listened in stunned silence, as Jessica's voice clearly stated her intention to borrow from Sophie's college fund and her dismissive comments about Sophie's worth compared to her boys. "I can't believe this is our daughter," my mother whispered. "The credit card in your name," I said gently. "You should report that to the police as identity theft." My father nodded grimly. "We'll do that today." "What about the $15,000 you were planning to give Jessica?" My parents looked at each other with the weight of their mistake heavy between them. "That money goes to Sophie's education fund," my father decided. "It should have been split equally between grandchildren anyway." As I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in days. The truth was finally emerging, and the adults who mattered were taking action to protect Sophie and hold Jessica accountable. But I wasn't finished yet. Jessica had threatened my daughter's emotional security and financial future. She'd taught Sophie that her efforts didn't matter, and her dreams weren't worth protecting. Now it was time for Jessica to learn that actions have consequences, and that some lines should never be crossed. I didn't have to wait long for Jessica's world to start crumbling. By Thursday morning, less than 3 hours after I'd finished meeting with Brad and my parents, Jessica's carefully constructed web of lies began unraveling at lightning speed. The first crack appeared when Jessica tried to use the credit card she'd opened in my mother's name, only to find it had been frozen by the bank's fraud department. My parents had reported the identity theft that morning, and the bank acted immediately. Panicked, Jessica called our mother, demanding to know why her emergency credit card wasn't working. "Your emergency credit card?" My mother's voice was ice cold. "Jessica Marie, you stole my identity and opened credit accounts without permission." "I borrowed your credit because mine were maxed out," Jessica protested. "It's not like you were using it. You said family helps family." "I said family helps family when asked. I never said family helps themselves to other family members' identities and credit ratings." Meanwhile, Brad had taken the boys to his parents' house and filed for legal separation. Jessica returned home from shopping to find a note explaining that he'd discovered her financial deception and would be staying elsewhere until they could meet with lawyers. Jessica's first instinct was to call me, screaming into my voicemail about how I'd destroyed her marriage and turned everyone against her. Her second instinct was to drive to Aunt Martha's house, 2 states away, hoping to secure more money before the truth reached our great aunt. But I'd already called Aunt Martha that morning. Jessica knocked on Aunt Martha's door that afternoon, dressed in her most expensive outfit and carrying a bouquet of flowers that probably cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week. "Oh, Jessica dear," Aunt Martha said with deceptive sweetness as she opened the door. "How lovely to see you. I've been wondering when you'd come to repay the $5,000 you borrowed." "Actually, Aunt Martha, I was hoping we could talk about extending that loan," Jessica began, launching into a prepared story about Brad's continuing job troubles and mounting expenses for the boys. "Sit down, dear," Aunt Martha interrupted, leading Jessica to the living room where photo printouts from Jessica's social media accounts were spread across the coffee table. Jessica's face went white as she recognized her own posts, showing expensive purchases and luxury activities spanning the same time period she'd claimed financial hardship. "Your cousin Eva called me," Aunt Martha said calmly. "She was concerned that you might have told me some stories that weren't quite true." "Aunt Martha, I can explain. Can you explain how you needed emergency money for school supplies while posting photos of yourself at a $400 per night spa resort? Jessica stammered through several attempted explanations, each one more ridiculous than the last. Here's what's going to happen. Aunt Martha continued with the quiet authority of someone who'd lived through 8 decades of human nonsense. You're going to write me a check right now for $5,000, or I'm calling the police to report elder fraud. I don't have $5,000 right now. Then you're going to sell that handbag you're carrying, and anything else you need to sell to get my money back. I'm 86 years old, Jessica. I don't have time for games. While Jessica was discovering that Aunt Martha was much sharper than she'd assumed, Brad was at our parents' house, showing them bank statements that revealed the true scope of Jessica's hidden spending. She's been taking cash advances from credit cards and hiding the statements, Brad explained. I thought our expenses were normal for a family with twins, but she was spending 3 times what she told me. My father studied the credit card statements with his businessman's eye for detail. She's been using different billing addresses so you wouldn't see these statements. How much total debt are we talking about? My mother asked. Roughly $45,000 that I know of, Brad replied. There might be more. My parents exchanged looks of horror. They'd been enabling Jessica's lifestyle without realizing they were funding a pattern of deception and financial abuse. Brad, we're so sorry, my mother said. We had no idea we were making this worse by giving Jessica money. You were trying to help your grandchildren, Brad replied. Jessica manipulated all of us. That evening, Jessica returned home to find Brad waiting with his lawyer and a locksmith. Her key no longer worked, and her belongings were packed in boxes on the front porch. You can't lock me out of my own house, Jessica protested. Actually, I can, Brad replied calmly. The house is in my name because your credit score was too low for the mortgage. You're going to be staying elsewhere while we work out custody and divorce proceedings. Divorce? Jessica's voice rose to a shriek. You can't divorce me over money. I'm your wife. You stole from a 7-year-old child, Brad said firmly. You stole from elderly relatives. You've been lying to me about our finances for months. I can't trust you anymore. Jessica's next move was to show up at our parents' house at 10 o'clock that night, sobbing and demanding they intervene in her marriage. Mom, Dad, Eva has poisoned everyone against me, Jessica wailed. She's made Brad think I'm some kind of criminal. Are you a criminal, Jessica? My father asked quietly. What? Did you or did you not open credit cards using your mother's social security number without permission? That's not the same thing. It's identity theft, my mother said flatly. It's a felony. Did you or did you not take money from Sophie's savings jar without asking? My father continued. She had plenty of money. That's theft from a minor. Did you or did you not lie to Aunt Martha about Brad's employment to obtain $5,000 under false pretenses? Jessica looked between our parents with growing panic, as she realized they weren't going to rescue her this time. You always take Eva's side, she finally exploded. She's perfect Eva with her perfect husband and her perfect life, and I'm the screw-up who gets blamed for everything. Eva didn't steal from a 7-year-old, my mother replied. Eva didn't commit identity theft. Eva didn't lie to elderly relatives for money. Those boys are your grandsons too, Jessica tried desperately. They need their mother. They need their mother to be honest and trustworthy, my father said. Right now, you're neither. As Jessica left our parents' house that night, she had nowhere to go. Her credit cards were frozen, her husband had changed the locks, her family had discovered her lies, and her victims were demanding justice. But the consequences were just beginning. Within 1 week of the truth coming to light, Jessica's entire life structure had collapsed like a house of cards built on quicksand. The woman who had confidently stolen from a 7-year-old, while lecturing about family priorities, now faced the full weight of consequences she'd never imagined possible. The legal ramifications came first. My parents filed a police report for identity theft, and the district attorney's office decided to prosecute due to the significant amount of fraudulent charges. Jessica was arrested at the motel where she'd been staying since Brad changed the locks, and the local newspaper ran a small item about a woman charged with identity theft and fraud. Jessica's friends from the Designer Deals shopping group suddenly stopped responding to her messages when they realized she was facing criminal charges. The community that had celebrated her ability to manipulate family members for luxury purchases now treated her like a toxic liability. The divorce proceedings moved quickly. Brad's lawyer had documented Jessica's pattern of financial deception so thoroughly that Jessica's own attorney advised her to accept Brad's terms rather than fight a battle she couldn't win. Brad was awarded primary custody of Marcus and Tyler, with Jessica getting supervised weekend visits until she completed court-mandated financial counseling and therapy. The judge was particularly harsh about Jessica's theft from Sophie, noting that anyone willing to steal from a child posed a risk to their own children's emotional well-being. "Your Honor," Jessica's lawyer had tried to argue, "my client was under significant financial stress. Your client was photographed at luxury spas and expensive restaurants during the same time period she claimed financial hardship," the judge interrupted. "This case demonstrates calculated deception, not desperation." The twins struggled to understand why their world had suddenly turned upside down. Brad brought them to our house one evening, hoping that spending time with Sophie might help them process the changes. "Why can't Mom live with us anymore?" Tyler asked Sophie as they colored together at our kitchen table. Sophie, wise beyond her 7 years after everything she'd experienced, thought carefully before answering. "Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that hurt other people. When that happens, they have to fix the mistakes before they can live together again." "Did Mom make mistakes that hurt you?" Marcus asked quietly. "She took my money without asking," Sophie said simply. "That made me sad because I was saving for something special." Tyler's crayon stopped moving across his coloring page. "Mom said you had too much money anyway." "Everyone's money belongs to them," Sophie explained patiently. "Even kids' money. When someone takes it without asking, that's called stealing." Marcus looked up with tears in his eyes. "Does that mean our mom is a bad person?" David, who'd been listening from the doorway, joined them at the table. "Your mom made some bad choices," he told the boys. "But people can learn from their mistakes and become better. That's why she's going to talk to doctors who help people make better choices." Meanwhile, Jessica was discovering that her consequences extended far beyond legal and family problems. The credit card companies had placed judgments against her for the fraudulent charges, effectively destroying her credit rating for years to come. She'd been evicted from her motel for non-payment, and with no income or available credit, she was forced to move in with a former college friend who agreed to let her sleep on the couch in exchange for household cleaning. The court-mandated therapy sessions revealed truths that Jessica had been avoiding her entire adult life. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the psychologist assigned to Jessica's case, specialized in narcissistic personality patterns and financial abuse. Jessica demonstrates classic symptoms of narcissistic entitlement combined with financial infidelity, Dr. Hendricks explained to Brad during a joint session he'd requested. Her ability to rationalize harmful behavior toward family members, particularly children, indicates deep-seated issues with empathy and impulse control. "Can she change?" Brad asked hopefully. Despite everything, he wanted his sons to have a healthy relationship with their mother. "Change is possible, but requires Jessica to acknowledge the harm she's caused and develop genuine empathy for her victims," Dr. Hendricks replied. "Currently, she remains focused on justifying her actions rather than understanding their impact." Indeed, Jessica's therapy sessions had become exercises in creative blame shifting. She told Dr. Hendricks that I had always been jealous of her relationship with our parents, that Brad was financially controlling, and that Sophie was spoiled compared to other children. "Help me understand," Dr. Hendricks said during one session, "how taking money from a 7-year-old benefits anyone." "Sophie had more money than she needed," Jessica replied automatically. "Who decides how much money a child needs?" "Adults who understand the world better than children do." "So you believe you had the right to take Sophie's savings without permission because you're an adult?" "I'm her aunt. Family should help family." "Did Sophie have the opportunity to say no?" Jessica shifted uncomfortably. "Children don't understand these decisions." "What do you think Sophie learned about family relationships from your actions?" For the first time, Jessica paused before responding. I don't know." It was the first crack in Jessica's defensive wall, but it would take months of therapy before she could acknowledge the full scope of damage she'd caused. Meanwhile, our family began healing. My parents replaced the $15,000 they'd planned to give Jessica, instead setting up a college fund for Sophie that would grow substantially by the time she reached 18. "We owe that little girl more than money," my mother said as we signed the paperwork. "We owe her the security of knowing that adults will protect her efforts and dreams." Aunt Martha recovered her $5,000 when Jessica was forced to liquidate her designer goods to pay court, ordered restitution. The handbag that had cost $1,500 sold for $300 at consignment, a lesson in how quickly luxury items lose value when they're purchased with stolen money. The twins began spending more time with our family, and Sophie embraced her role as the older, wiser cousin who could help them understand right from wrong. "Aunt Eva," Marcus asked during one visit, "will Sophie ever trust our mom again?" I thought about his question carefully. "Trust has to be earned," I explained. "Your mom hurt Sophie, and now she needs to show through her actions that she's learned better ways to treat people." "How long does that take?" "As long as it takes for someone to truly change their heart," I replied. Jessica's supervised visits with the boys were awkward and strained. Without the financial resources to buy their affection with expensive gifts and activities, she struggled to connect with Marcus and Tyler in meaningful ways. "Mom seems different," Tyler confided to Sophie during one play session. "She keeps saying she's sorry, but I don't think she understands what she's sorry for." Sophie, now 8 years old and remarkably perceptive about adult behavior, nodded wisely. "Sometimes grown-ups say sorry because they think they have to, not because they really understand why they hurt people." But slowly, very slowly, Jessica began to grasp the reality of what she'd lost and why. The turning point came during a family therapy session when Dr. Hendricks asked her to write letters to everyone she'd harmed, not to send them, but to articulate the specific damage she'd caused. Writing to Sophie proved to be the most difficult assignment Jessica had ever faced. For the first time, she had to consider how a 7-year-old girl had felt watching adults dismiss her efforts, steal her treasures, and tell her she was worth less than her male cousins. "I can't finish this letter," Jessica told Dr. Hendricks during their next session. "What makes it difficult?" "When I imagine how Sophie felt," Jessica's voice broke. "I made her feel worthless. I made her think her dreams didn't matter. I taught her not to trust family." It was the first time Jessica had acknowledged anyone's pain besides her own. The road to redemption would be long and uncertain, but at least it had finally begun. 6 months later, I stood in our driveway watching Sophie ride the bicycle she'd finally been able to buy with money our parents had given her to replace what Jessica stole. The morning sun caught the silver streamers flowing from her handlebars as she practiced riding without training wheels, her face radiant with the joy that comes from achieving a goal through patience and perseverance. "Look, Mommy," she called out proudly. "I can ride all by myself now." "I see that, sweetheart," I replied, marveling at how much stronger and more confident she'd become through surviving this ordeal. David joined me on the front steps, carrying 2 cups of coffee, and the satisfied smile of a father watching his daughter thrive despite the challenges life had thrown at her. "The therapy appointment went well yesterday," he reported. "Dr. Martinez says Sophie has processed the trauma remarkably well for her age." Sophie's individual counseling sessions had been crucial in helping her understand that Jessica's actions reflected Jessica's problems, not Sophie's worth. Dr. Martinez had worked patiently to rebuild Sophie's confidence in her own judgment and her right to expect protection from the adults in her life. "What did she say about the college fund situation?" Sophie told Dr. Martinez she wants to keep saving her own money too, even though she knows the college fund exists. She said earning her bicycle taught her that working toward goals feels better than just receiving gifts. I watched my daughter navigate a tricky turn in our driveway, her determination evident in every pedal stroke. The experience with Jessica had aged her in some ways, but it had also given her an early understanding of her own strength and resilience. Brad's car pulled into our driveway, and Marcus and Tyler tumbled out, racing towards Sophie, with the easy enthusiasm of children who'd learned to trust again. The boys spent every other weekend with us now, and their relationship with Sophie had evolved into something beautiful to witness. "Cousin Sophie, can you teach us to ride without training wheels too?" Tyler called out. "Sure," Sophie replied, stopping her bike with practiced ease. "But first you have to save enough money to buy your own bicycle. That's the rule." The boys groaned dramatically but accepted her wisdom. Over the past months, they'd watched Sophie work extra chores to earn money for bicycle accessories and maintenance, learning valuable lessons about effort and reward. Brad approached with a manila envelope in his hand, and a mixture of relief and sadness in his expression. "The divorce papers are final," he announced. Jessica completed her community service and financial counseling program. "How is she doing?" "Better," he admitted. "The therapy has helped her understand why she made the choices she did. She's working at a department store and living in a small apartment. She's actually earning her own money for the first time in years." Jessica's transformation had been gradual but genuine. The court-mandated therapy had forced her to confront the narcissistic patterns that had driven her to steal from a child and manipulate elderly relatives. She'd written sincere apology letters to everyone she'd harmed, including a heartfelt note to Sophie that acknowledged the specific ways she'd damaged their relationship. "Has she asked to see Sophie yet?" David inquired. "She wants to, but she's waiting until Dr. Hendricks thinks she's ready. Jessica knows she needs to prove she's changed, not just say she's changed." The boys had begun having supervised visits with Jessica in Dr. Hendricks' office, working through the complex emotions of loving a mother who'd made terrible choices. Jessica was learning to interact with her sons without using gifts or bribes, developing genuine connections based on conversation and shared activities. "Daddy," Marcus called out, "can we tell you about our money jars?" Brad smiled as his sons ran to him, eager to show off the saving systems they'd created after watching Sophie's disciplined approach to financial goals. "Tyler saved $14 already," Marcus announced proudly. "And I have $18, because I did extra work helping Aunt Eva organize her garage. We're going to buy our own bicycles," Tyler added. "Sophie says it feels better when you earn something yourself." I felt a surge of pride watching my daughter teach her cousins about persistence and self-reliance. The painful experience with Jessica had ultimately strengthened Sophie's character and given her the confidence to mentor younger children. My parents arrived for our weekly family dinner, carrying grocery bags and wearing the slightly guilty expressions of grandparents who'd learned hard lessons about enabling destructive behavior. "How's our favorite cyclist?" my father asked Sophie as she parked her bicycle. "Great, Grandpa. Want to see how fast I can ride now?" After dinner, my mother promised, "I brought ingredients for your favorite cookies." My parents had worked hard to rebuild trust with Sophie, demonstrating through consistent actions that they would protect her interests and validate her feelings. They'd also begun attending family therapy sessions to understand how their lifelong pattern of rescuing Jessica had enabled her harmful behavior. "Any word from Aunt Martha?" I asked as we gathered on the porch. "She's doing well," my mother replied. "She said Jessica sent her a card last week thanking her for insisting on accountability. Martha thinks Jessica might actually become a decent person if she keeps working at it." Aunt Martha had become something of a family hero, her tough, love approach to Jessica's manipulation, serving as a model for how the rest of us should handle future problems. As we watched the children play together in the yard, I reflected on how dramatically our family dynamics had changed. Jessica's theft from Sophie had forced all of us to examine our roles in enabling dysfunction and our responsibility to protect vulnerable family members. "Eva," my father said quietly, "I want you to know how proud I am of how you handled this situation. I just protected my daughter." "You did more than that," my mother added. "You protected all of us from continuing to enable destructive behavior. If you hadn't investigated and exposed Jessica's patterns, she would have kept escalating until she destroyed her marriage, bankrupted Brad, and taught those boys terrible lessons about honesty and respect." David squeezed my hand as we watched Sophie patiently teaching Tyler how to balance on her bicycle. "She's going to be an amazing adult," he observed. "This experience taught her early that she has the right to expect fair treatment and the responsibility to stand up for what's right." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across our neighborhood, I felt the deep satisfaction that comes from successfully protecting what matters most. Sophie's laughter filled the air as she celebrated Tyler's first successful ride without training wheels, her joy infectious and pure. Jessica had thought she could steal from a child without consequences, manipulate family members with sob stories, and maintain her lifestyle through deception and emotional abuse. Instead, she'd learned that actions have consequences, that trust must be earned, and that children deserve protection from adults who would exploit their vulnerability. The experience had taught our entire family that sometimes love means holding people accountable, that enabling destructive behavior isn't kindness, and that protecting children's emotional security is every adult's responsibility. Sophie dismounted her bicycle and ran to me with flushed cheeks and sparkling eyes. "Mommy, can we put $5 in my new savings jar tonight?" "Of course, sweetheart. What are you saving for now?" "A bicycle for Tyler and Marcus. They're working really hard, but I want to help them reach their goal faster." My heart swelled with pride as I realized that despite everything she'd experienced, Sophie had learned the right lesson about generosity. She wanted to help others achieve their goals through her own effort, not by taking resources that didn't belong to her. "That's a wonderful idea," I told her, wrapping her in a hug that conveyed all my love and admiration for the remarkable person she was becoming. As we headed inside for dinner, I felt grateful for the painful experience that had ultimately strengthened our family bonds and taught us all valuable lessons about integrity, accountability, and love. Sometimes the most difficult challenges lead to the most important growth, and sometimes protecting what you love requires courage you didn't know you possessed. Have you ever had to stand up to a family member who was hurting someone you loved? The hardest part of my journey was realizing that keeping peace isn't the same as keeping love, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable for their actions. I'd love to hear your thoughts about family dynamics and protecting children in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking this video to help others find it. Stories like this matter because they show that ordinary people can find extraordinary courage when protecting what matters most. Subscribe to this channel for more real, life stories about finding strength in difficult situations, and share this with anyone who might need to hear that standing up for what's right is always worth it. Thank you for listening to my story, and for being part of a community that believes children deserve protection, truth matters, and love sometimes requires difficult choices. I hope Sophie's courage inspires you to trust your instincts and protect the vulnerable people in your own life.